So the purpose of the day's hearing is to talk about storage of water. And many people, I've noticed here in the eastern part of the United States, don't understand that the western part of the United States is an arid and dry region, and about 78 million people living within it have to, for the most part, Seattle excluded, store water to get through the spring, summer, and a portion of the fall months. This is a necessity for most of those 78 million people. There are some, if you read Cadillac Desert, you would discover that folks have asserted water storage is bad and irrigation is worse. I would suggest that that particular approach has been proven incorrect, and that many of the problems that are suggested in that 30-year-old book have been appropriately addressed. The one thing that has happened that is of serious concern is the increased, not anticipated demands upon stored water. So for those of us who have been in this space for a long time, we recognize that originally the in-stream interests were ignored, and thus when water was stored, the anticipated use was generally, for three or four purposes: hydro, agriculture, flood control. Over time, the purposes of that stored water have been expanded to include in-stream interests, tribal rights, and other new demands. Without commenting upon the nature or quality of those demands, I'll simply say that they're real and they need to be taken into account. This means that the original storage approach has been or necessarily modified to include a lot of uses that weren't previously contemplated. So of course we need to store more water. The challenge, of course, is finding out how to do it. And most of us would, who have studied how water is stored in the West, understand that it's extraordinarily expensive to put in a new reservoir. It's extraordinarily expensive to raise the height of some, although I think the calculus today is changing. In other words, in the past, 100 years ago, folks went to the federal government and pointed out that if we're going to settle out here in the West, the federal government was going to have to help, and the federal government did. And the reason it did so was to make sure that people who chose to live out here could actually make a living. And if you go back and read the congressional minutes of the original Reclamation Act, you will find that the focus was on making sure that people could make a living out here. So that is the foundation for the original investment, but now the challenge is, in constrained spending times, how do we pay for increased water storage if we're going to raise the height of a dam or if we're going to use some of the other techniques? And that brings me to the other techniques. And some of our witnesses today will be talking about how much water we could generate in upper regions of our watersheds if we just better managed our forests. And so we have ongoing studies in different states to determine how much water would be saved if we did a better job of removing, let's say, the 1,000 stems per acre and reducing it down to that which forestry experts tell us we should have. How much water could we save if we had appropriate places for snow to rest as it waited to melt? How much can we generate in the upper regions by preserving the snow and the snowpack in the watersheds better? One of the challenges that we have, of course, in any water situation is that just when drought is overwhelming, you get 65 feet of snow in the Sierras. And so all of a sudden, everyone thinks the problem's over and it's time to move on. That most assuredly is not the case, as we'll hear testimony regarding what's happening in the Central Valley. And we'll have some focus upon aquifer storage, which I think is probably the most likely and both financially and readily available means of storing water. So we're going to be talking about that also today, and I welcome that kind of dialogue. It happens that we'll be holding a off-site hearing in the Central Valley soon, and I look forward to having these discussions. It's important today that we recognize this is an oversight hearing. I hope the discussion will lead us to solutions that work for all of the people that now need this stored water. I left cities out. I shouldn't have. There are literally millions of people now reliant upon stored water. So I think it's extraordinarily important that this this hearing be successful today.